I'm JJ Perez from Inside Runner Sports. Greg Luca, San Antonio Express News, coming to you on a Saturday afternoon edition of the UTSA post-game wrap-up, where the Roadrunners down South Florida 49-21. Greg, a complete outing, a thumping, lopsided win by the Roadrunners. Kind of just ran away with this one on a day where there was a lot of emotions surrounding the program with senior day, with the speculation about Jeff Traylor interviewing at Texas A&M, and the Roadrunners being in contention for the AAC title game. Greg, where do you want to start? Just all the offense we saw. I can't believe
I
I
think
haven't mentioned Frank Harris yet.
because I
What
think
a
there's
game!
only one option, yeah.
What a game!
And it's like for him to have accomplished all that he's accomplished and then come in on such an emotional night and an important game, not for nothing as well, to deliver the kind of performance he did with the new school record, 523 yards of total offense. And you can break that down so many different ways. I think the running was actually the most impressive part of this,
Right?
just because
Yeah.
I haven't seen it this season. I think he entered this game with like less than 200 yards for the year, maybe. And it's because of the turf toe injury in week 2 that they have just been not wanting to run him as much, or maybe he just hasn't been as effective at it if he wasn't moving as well as he had been previously in his career. And the other part of that is I think you see good coaches with any mobile quarterback will kind of take it easy on him early in the season. And then as you get late in the year, and you have to worry less about wear and tear and keeping them up for the long term, that you do what you have to do to win the game. And Jeff Traylor admitted as much after the game. He said, we got to let him go full throttle and see what he's got for Tulane. A huge game coming up this week. So I think I thought it was really evident. There was one play that they used to run a lot last year that they haven't run much this year. It's like where either a H back or a receiver comes across on like a sweep action, and then Frank has the option to either hand off or kind of keep it and run off tackle. And it's like a wildcat looking kind of play, but he does it just as the quarterback. And they just haven't gone to that, and they went to it in this game. And that's, to me, is the sign that they're pulling out all the stops if he's just running between the numbers and they don't really care anymore. So he is effective in that role. And I think that we saw he just looks faster and faster. I feel like each week he gets farther removed from that injury. It feels like it's not bothering him at all anymore. And so I think we've talked about since the very beginning part of the season when things weren't going as well. Do we believe that it's going to look like this all year, or do we believe that UTSA is going to get back to the level of offense we've seen in the past? And we couldn't find any reasons they wouldn't get up to that high level that we've seen previously. And now you see that they're hitting that stride.
Yeah, the best game offensively all season long. Frank Harris looks like the Frank Harris of 2 years ago when he was running through, slicing through defenses both in the passing game and on the ground. And the passing game was important in this game too because South Florida was not letting UTSA do much with their running backs.
Yeah, and it's interesting overall when you look at the offense. The 643 yards is a record, but I think there's probably going to be a lot of different metrics you could look at where they've had better games because
Right.
USF played so fast. UTSA was out there a ton, and we've had games where it was like, oh, they scored on 8 of 9 drives or seven
Yeah.
drives or whatever, and here they turned it over on downs twice. They punted 3 times, and that was all before the fourth quarter when obviously it was some reserves in there and you can't really read as much into that. But even the number one offense wasn't like they were scoring every possession like we've seen on some of these other games. And there was even some times early where we remarked that maybe Frank Harris missed a couple throws that we thought he
Yeah.
would normally have or that would have been critical to keep the ball moving at that stage of the game. But they just had so many opportunities out there on offense, and Frank was at such a high level the rest of the time that they were able to keep moving despite. Yeah, I think USF, it seemed like through some different things at them, where sometimes it seemed like they were selling out to stop the run and they weren't going to let that happen. And other times it seemed like they were, taking away something else that UTSA would have wanted to do. And I guess it was probably an effort just to keep UTSA off balance. Based on what we've seen from USF's defense this year, they probably had to try to do something a little bit different if they were going to have any kind of success in this matchup. But it worked in spurts, I guess. They got a few stops that they needed, and maybe that just comes down to UTSA missed a couple of fourth and shorts, if I remember right. So perhaps they could have extended some drives and had even more scoring in this game. But generally speaking, UTSA obviously had plenty of answers to have the
Right.
all-time most productive total offense yardage in program history. I think 643.
Yeah, big, huge offensive night. I don't want that to overshadow. It will obviously with the how the defense performed. UTSA created 2 turnovers on defense, 2 interceptions. There was a point there in the middle of the game where South Florida had the ball 7 times and UTSA held them scoreless. A pretty solid effort defensively by the Roadrunners, right, Greg?
Yeah, and it wasn't exactly what we've seen up to this point, where it seemed like the pass rush was what was really setting the
Yeah,
tone. There were some times that they created pressure, but they finished the game with just one sack and 5 tackles for loss, which is a lot lower. But it seemed like in the secondary they made some pretty solid plays and were able to keep too much from getting going in that sense. I mean, there was, one or two where they got beat, but generally it seemed like they had guys covered, and they forced some tough situations like a 3rd and long or a 4th and long, and then now you're able to do these things like where you create an interception, like DeJuan Griffin's play was
yeah.
a very desperate pass attempt for South Florida that ended up getting picked off. So I think that the defensive effort was pretty strong after the first couple series where USF hit a little bit, and I think it'd be interesting to do some kind of study or way to break this down. But we talked about coming out of halftime how they're usually pretty good, and it seems like they
Yeah.
make good adjustments. But I think we've seen smaller versions of that like this before. I doubt this is the first time that it's felt like in the first quarter the defense was struggling a little bit. I mean, even I know against FAU, the first quarter was where they got that first drive was where FAU got most production. And I forget if it was the game right before that or right after that, but I remember they happened back to back that the team they were playing scored a couple times. And then after that, the defense basically pitched a shutout. So we see that they kind of diagnose what the game plan against them is going to be in real time and make the adjustments necessary to keep it from having a productive day.
And they look dialed in for sure after that first quarter. Want to talk about Rashad Wisdom a little bit. It looked like he had a pretty good game in his final home game as a Roadrunner. Maybe like a renaissance performance by him. I don't know if that's a fair statement, but I mean he looked like the Rashad Wisdom of old after he went through it last year with his shoulder issue, and I don't think he planned to come back this season, and it's kind of a testament to him and Frank are like the two cornerstones of this senior class, and probably going to go down as all-time Roadrunners in my book.
Oh, for sure. And Rashad finished with 8 tackles, which was the team lead, and he got credited with a broken up pass as well. And I think in a matchup like this, where the team is going to try to move the ball pretty quickly against them, and maybe you have a lot of short passing or different option things that you can come down and crash against, that's probably where he's at his best. When you have these really spread teams that work the deep part of the field a lot more regularly or give them a lot of deep intermediate routes and things that they have to deal with, it seems like maybe he's a little bit less comfortable with that. But when he can play
Yeah,
downhill, it seems like he's at his best. And so I think he was able to just get a lot of momentum flowing towards the line of scrimmage. You would see where he sees where the ball is going to go, and then he gets there, and then he makes the tackle immediately and gets the stop that they need at that point. So generally, I think that's probably when he's at his best, and he had an opportunity to do that in this game. I think overall this season has been, solid, maybe not spectacular. Trey Moore's kind of stolen the mantle of the top defensive player on that team, and he earned it with the level of production that he's had. But Rashad's been very solid in his role. You can't undersell just what it means to have such a reliable guy and a veteran presence back there.
it did coming out of this game appear like UTSA may be a little bit banged up at the running back position. We saw Kavorian Barnes was dressed. I don't know how much he played. I saw him get in there a few times, maybe just once. I'm not too sure. And
Yeah,
then
I have. So not
Kavorian,
to cut you off, but I
yeah,
want to weigh in on that because
yeah,
it's been, I guess, for all the people out there playing whatever
yeah,
betting,
gambling, all the
whatever, there's
gamblers.
been people asking about this, and I double checked the video this morning, and he played at least those 3 snaps right
Yeah,
before halftime. I think that was
right.
probably after Robert Henry had already been out there for a couple series, and then Rocco Griffin was a little bit banged up at that stage of the game. We saw him working with the trainer on the sideline, and then he ended up coming back in. And I think Rocco and Robert platooned until Kedra Cobb seemed to get a lot of the looks
Yeah.
down the stretch. And so there was just that one series at least. I don't know if there were others, but I double checked it on the video this morning because people were bothering us about it was 3 plays right at the final minute before halftime that Kavorian was at least on the field. He didn't touch the ball, obviously, or else we'd see it in the stat sheet, but he was out there. He ran a couple routes, and I think he was in a pass block on one series or something, one play or something like that. So,
Yeah, certainly with potentially the two most important games of the season coming up, that is an area we need to be mindful of. I don't know that we'll get anything official on the record, but certainly we'll have to circle back on that one this week. So
well, if it looks like it looked yesterday, I think that's still fine.
yeah,
I don't think that if there were some issues with probably the productivity you would want to see out of the running back position. Certainly, you can attribute that to USF locking in on taking that away and forcing Frank Harris to beat them, which is an interesting approach. But you saw how it worked out, and I think generally that running back position, even with the group they had yesterday, or even if even if you have just one of those 3 guys and he can
yeah.
play a ton of snaps and then have somebody like Kedrick Cobbs who you've seen on the field before, I don't think that that's going to be a position that prevents UTSA from succeeding in this match against Tulane.
So the Roadrunners improved to 8-3 overall and 7-0 in league play. They are tied for first place with Tulane, who also won today. and SMU, who also won today. Greg, we got a Week 13 win and you're in situation for these three schools. I think it's been trending this way the entire season, and this is the big week. This is the game of the year for the Roadrunners.
Yeah, this matchup was not scheduled in this slot accidentally, I don't think. Obviously, they had the flexibility to put whatever game that they thought was most compelling in that scenario for this 2:30 ABC kickoff that'll be seen nationally. But I think that when the schedule came together, they probably had a feeling that these two teams would be in this situation. And even at media day, I don't remember who it was, but somebody we talked to was like, yeah, we might get to play Tulane back to back at the end of the year. Like they already sort of understood that they were going to be near the top and Tulane was going to be near the top, and it might end up being a rematch for the conference championship game, depending what happens with SMU and with the tiebreaker scenario. I think from UTSA's perspective, it's pretty simple. Like you said, it's essentially just playoffs now. This is the AAC championship game semifinal, and if you win that one, you get to face. I guess there's a chance it could be Tulane again, but it could also be SMU, and so you got two games for the conference championship, which is the best position you could hope to be in.
Yeah, so we won't know until next Saturday afternoon. SMU plays Navy at 11 a.m. The Roadrunners, of course, play Friday afternoon. So we'll have to be in wait and see mode following UTSA's game to see what happens.
Yeah, if I remember the tiebreaker correctly, I probably should just not say anything and look at it. But the CFP ranking is the most important, right? So if Tulane is ranked, even if UTSA beats them and SMU were to lose, then I think Tulane would still get that spot. But it's probably a moot point. Like I don't think SMU is going to lose to Navy. So it's essentially the winner of UTSA and Tulane will face SMU. And
Most likely.
I'd be very if UTSA wins that game, I'd be very surprised if the matchup were in San Antonio. I think at that point they'd be going to Dallas. I will at some point this week look at the computer rankings that they said they're going to rely on and make a little spreadsheet, and I'll put it out there on the social medias for everybody to see. But it seems like based on the results that we've seen to this point in the season and just the margin of dominance that SMU's put together. And at that point, you even have to factor in the non-conference schedule, which obviously does not shine well on UTSA. So I think when you put all that together, SMU's going to have an edge in those computer rankings, and we'll have a inside shot to host when all's said and done if both teams are undefeated in the league. But generally speaking, it's so from that perspective, it's going to be a win and you're in, and I wouldn't expect SMU to slip up and get in the way of that.
Greg, I've asked this question a few times the last few weeks and haven't gotten a real solid answer, but do you think the Roadrunners are capable of winning this championship this season? I certainly do. They're trending upward. I think they've just played their best game of the season, and the only thing that could stop them, I've said this a few times now, is themselves, and that's against two pretty good teams in what is potentially looking like either Tulane twice or as Tulane and SMU. So, what do you think? You think I'm off base there?
Well, I would disagree with the idea that the only thing that can stop them is themselves, because I think they could play their best game and still lose to either one of these teams. I think these teams are really good. So I think, SMU or Tulane could also stop them if they don't do it themselves. I think
Okay.
those two teams are pretty elite. But when you look at the league as a whole, it's been interesting this year to sort of watch all the results. And I don't know how much stock you guys want to put into this, but if you go by the S&P Plus, like the ratings of the conferences, they have the American ninth this year, and that's behind the USA. I think it's just been kind of a down year for the league. So if UTSA can do what they did in Conference USA the last 2 years, and I know we all talked about how much of a step up it's going to be. And in the big picture, it will be generally year to year. The AAC is going to be stronger than it is this year. And I think next year they could end up having a lot of strong teams, and it could be a grinder of a schedule week to week. But this season we've talked about the margin of victory that UTSA has enjoyed in these league games. I think they average about 18 point something points per game over these other league teams. And it's because the matchups just haven't been that difficult for them. And so generally, this is going to be where that difference comes in, because those top two teams are as good as it gets in the group of five. And I think they've proven that now and in the past. And as you know, maybe SMU hasn't had the results lately, but when you think about their infrastructure and the fact that they're going to the ACC sooner than later, obviously they had the potential to put this kind of a team on the field and be as formidable as they are. So I think that UTSA, if you can get this far, you can win the title because you've done it before, and you've proven you can beat all these teams that you faced at this point. But now you face a different challenge, and I think UTSA is up for it, but I do think it'll be unlike anything we've seen for them this conference season so far.
A report came out on Friday out of Austin that Jeff Traylor interviewed for the Texas A&M head coach opening. we asked him about it in post game last night, and he he commented, but not he didn't answer the question.
No, not
So
really.
yeah,
It just, yeah, he just talked about the seniors on the
right,
team and we should be more focused on them, which was kind of the message through the week as well. That's why I think if you look at that story that says it was from an A&M source, and I just think people on this side, especially given senior night and the stakes of the season, are not wanting to be as vocal about it. What I've kind of gathered and sense is that Jeff Traylor will have a good shot at that job if a lot of the other dream candidates aren't available or if a lot of different things fall through. And so if that's your safety option, you're doing pretty well. I mean, Jeff Traylor's a pretty accomplished coach and would probably do outstanding there by all accounts. Obviously, like we talked about last week, it would be a different challenge than what he's faced before, but I think he would be up for it. And so I don't want to say fallback option. That sounds really negative, but I think A&M is probably going to continue to swing for the fences and then know that that's there because other guys might turn it down, but it would be unreasonable to expect Jeff Traylor to turn that job down. That's a dream job for him and something that would offer a whole lot different kind of potential than what he has at UTSA. So I think generally probably shouldn't have been that surprising that he interviewed with them just because why wouldn't he be in the mix? And they probably interviewed a lot of people. Depends probably how you want to define interview too. I don't know to
right.
what extent, but yeah, not necessarily a shocking report, but I think we'll still have to see how that plays out in the next week or two. They'll want to have it done before the transfer portal window opens, which I think is December 3rd. So could Jeff potentially try to make it hold off until after Tulane if he was the guy who was in the mix? I don't know that A&M would want to wait any longer than they had to, but just a lot of different things to consider. But I do think it's not necessarily surprising that that conversation exists.
Right. Yeah. I agree spot on with everything you said. So it's just been a pretty interesting week to see how all that play has played out. And then you throw the senior day stuff on top of it. And I don't know if it was a pretty emotional week, but what are you gonna remember from some of these seniors? I know we joked offline a little bit about how one time Frank Harris told us he was a scout team quarterback of the week.
Right,
Uh,
right.
and one of the guys I remember is T. Haynes. He ended up being one of the starters. Alvarez, I mean, he might be the MVP of the O line just because of his versatility. Of course, you have Rashad and Frank there, but just some of those other guys. Mackay Hart, I mean, careers cut short by injury, and the list goes on with those guys.
One thing I want to note to your initial point is it's like a very sports media thing to do. But if UTSA had stumbled in this game or even potentially lost, we would have said about the weight of all these different distractions to have the A&M thing floating out there, to have the emotions of senior day, and to potentially be looking ahead to a trap game at Tulane. And I don't think just because they did well that those things were any less relevant, but we don't talk about them as much. So I do think they deserve some credit for not letting any of that be an impact. And so getting that part out of the way, when you ask about the senior class and what I'm going to remember most, it's just kind of unbelievable and storybook that Frank Harris and Rashad Wisdom both exist at the same time, to have like the number 0 be a local guy who is wildly productive and was an exciting recruit and became the unquestioned leader and a role model for their offense and defense. I mean, there's no like red flags they never say anything sketchy. They're like the perfect guy to have in that position to help a new coach like Jeff Traylor get settled in here and adapt and just to set the culture. It comes from those two guys in a lot of ways, just because everybody has known for, Jeff said it took a little bit of time before it was kind of unanimous, but there's a reason they were number 0 in Jeff's first year, which was 4 seasons ago, that they were always sort of highlighted as the players who were going to be the leaders of this team and were going to represent what Roadrunners football is all about. And it's going to be different without them. I mean, if Trey Moore is still here, he'll take up that mantle on defense, and whoever's the quarterback will always be that guy on offense. And so there will be new faces of the Roadrunners. But I think for a long time, Frank Harris and Rashad Wisdom are going to be the first guys that come to mind when you think Roadrunners offense and Roadrunners defense. And I think that that's really interesting that their careers ended up being symmetrical and that they just checked every box you could ever want a college player to check. You know what I mean? And then that they had the accomplishments on top of that to lead this program from to be able to catch one bad season and then 2 championship seasons and then the start of this new era, and that they had to move to a new facility while they were here, and just all of the different things that they went through, how they're going to sort of embody this growth and transition. If the program continues on this path, they're going to be the generation that feels like put it on the map, and they're going to be the two guys that people talk about way more than anybody else, and they've earned that in a lot of ways.
Yep, they certainly kick-started this program to the point where it's at. So, Greg, I think we hit on everything. Anything else you got? Anything for me? We're
No, I
gonna.
do think I was going to say I thought I really liked hearing Josh Cephas speak after the game.
Oh yes,
He's
yeah,
obviously had a difficult road with the DWI situation, and I don't want to talk about it too much because I feel like we've kind of run it into the ground at this point, and I think it's gone its course. But he brought it up without any of us asking
asking.
about
Yeah,
it. I was sitting there thinking, like, do I want to, go down that
right.
road, or do you just want to kind of enjoy this day? And we put it to bed last week, but he went there, and so then we kind of had some follow-ups on that, and it was just interesting to hear him talk about that and reflect on that. So I'd encourage anybody to go listen to that interview or even read the story about it, and then um, just a different kind of a legacy than what Frank or Rashad have, just because
Right.
of everything else that and not being a local guy, it's just kind of like hasn't had that same esteem as much as he's been widely respected by his teammates forever. But I think is also a very important piece of this thing too.
UTSA's all-time leading receiver. That's crazy. So
And he
yeah,
set the receptions mark earlier in the year, so
yeah,
he's got those two to his name. I don't know how close he is on touchdowns, but he's not going to get the touchdowns mark for a single season unless he went crazy. But he could end up with the receiving yards mark, and I think the receptions mark too, especially if UTSA has 3 games left.
yeah. Well, Greg, I think that'll wrap this one up. The Roadrunners win 7 straight, their 8th win overall. Absolutely massive game next Friday in New Orleans against Tulane. We'll both be there. Uh,
Hell yeah.
appreciate everybody watching. JJ Perez, Inside Runner Sports. Greg Luca, San Antonio Express News. Thanks, guys.